Hi, how's it going? How did I first discover Djinns and why did I want to work on it? I guess the more accurate question would be maybe how did I first discover Fatma Aydemir's work and when did I first start working with her? Um, and I think I read her first novel, Ellbogen Elbow, when it first came out, so quite a few years before Djinns. And I had previously been involved in translating a essay collection of which she was a co-editor. So we actually kind of had a history of collaborating in the past. And a couple of years before Djinns actually came out, she had asked me if I was interested in translating a short story that she had written that she was going to be presenting at an international literary festival, I believe in the Netherlands. And as it turned out, this was actually the Hüseyin chapter of Djinns, a slightly different version, but essentially very similar content. And at that time, it was kind of a standalone short story. I think she was kind of in the process of developing it into a longer novel, but she had written this one chapter as sort of a standalone. And I translated that. And then quite a bit later, she contacted me again and said, it actually turns out that this is going to be a novel. We'd like to use your translation as something like a sample translation, but you're going to need to adapt it because that short story is now a chapter in a longer novel. And so then she sent me the sort of revised version as well as a manuscript of the rest of the novel. And I wound up translating a couple of chapters to use as sample translations. What did I most enjoy about working on it? I think my favorite thing about this novel is the many voices of the different characters. I like the fact that each chapter sort of functions as a standalone short story and that you get this one very limited perspective on a larger story and that together each of the chapters form parts of a greater whole. It was really fun to try to develop unique narrative voices for each of the chapters, to try and understand the motivations of the different characters, and to try to really make their unique contributions to the overall narrative stand out. That was also a challenge. I think one of the questions that you were going to ask me is what is the sort of specific challenge that I encountered working on it? And I think the challenge was also the thing that I enjoyed most because it was really just an interesting process to try to figure out where each of these characters were coming from. What was it like working with Fatma? It's great to work with Fatma. We've worked together on a number of different projects. I think we have a lot of shared interests and a sort of common understanding of the function of literature, why she is motivated to write these kind of works, what their potential impact would be both in Germany and in the wider world. Um, we're also the same age. We kind of belong to the same generation. We have family experiences that sort of complement each other or overlap. So I think it's not a big stretch for me to work with her and feel like I have a pretty solid understanding of where she's coming from and what the project means both to her and to a sort of larger contribution to literature. Do I have a favorite line from the book? Yes, but I also think that I have a lot of favorite lines. Kind of off the cuff, a few lines come to mind from the Peri chapter, but I think if I thought long enough, I would definitely have a favorite line from each of the chapters. Um, but because these are the ones that I often read in public readings or have sort of engaged with in other ways, they're maybe the ones that pop out to my mind first. I could read them. Okay, so both of these are from Peri's chapter. One of them is when she's thinking about just sort of her difficulty fitting in German society. And she says, her own search for her heritage ended in the silence beneath her father's mustache and those unpredictable phases between her mother's blank stares and tears. Assimilation, Peri thought, had no history. Assimilation was the opposite of history. It was history's end, history's extermination. It was that empty feeling in her heart whenever someone spoke of homesickness. It was the absent impulse to correct people who mispronounced her name. Because what if it wasn't their pronunciation that was wrong, but Peri's name itself? So that would be one. And the other one that I really like is when she's kind of talking with her little brother and thinking about the significance of the concept of djinns and just what djinns really mean. And she says, "Is it easier to worry about djinns than to worry about Nazis? After all, both live among us. Both are capable of remaining unnoticed until the moment of catastrophe, when the reality of their existence finally becomes undeniable." And I like that line a lot as well. Do I have a character in the book who I feel most fond of? I think that's also a really difficult question, and I think probably my understanding of what fondness is also would differ greatly depending on my relationship to the character. There are certainly characters that I feel like I had the most overlap with in terms of my own life story. I feel like Peri's positionality as someone who goes away to university, who's struggling with the significance of why she would study something like literature, of trying to find her place in the world, dealing with loss. She's a character that I think I identified with a lot. But in one way or another, I feel like I know all of these characters. I feel like there are people or relationships that I've had in my life that in some way parallel each of them. I think as a translator, it was perhaps the most challenging and the most rewarding to translate Hakan's character, but I certainly don't think in any respect that he is the character that I like the most, although I certainly also feel a certain soft spot for him. He's a very flawed and damaged character, but he also had a very distinctive narrative voice, and I think it was both challenging and just really fun to try to figure out how he would talk in English. Why should people read Djinns? I think I would just quote a German critic on this, and that's just the idea that in the future, this is the book that people will look back to when they try to understand this moment in time in Germany. It provides a lot of backstory about the experiences of the 1990s and the early 2000s, thinking through where we got to or how we got to this moment today. And it presents a very different take on that 1990s German history that's very often presented in this very positive way that ignores the violence of the experience for so many of the people living in Germany at the time. And I think that Djinns, in a lot of ways, is one of the first novels to really bring this other telling of history to the forefront. And I guess in that regard, it also sort of carries on into the next question, which was why should people read translated fiction? I think fiction in general is really world making. It really helps us to understand not just the world that we live in, but other possible worlds that might have been or that should have been. And this is really a novel that helps us to understand why Germany is the way it is and how perhaps it could have been different. And the final question, which book do you think everyone should read? I don't know if I have an answer to that. I feel like in general, everyone should read books. And people have different interests and different reasons for reading. But I think the most important thing, particularly today, is that people continue to read, that people understand that books still have a lot to offer, and that, they really make the world a richer place. So I think the most important thing is that we just keep reading. Of course, it would be great if everyone reads a book like Djinns, but the most important thing is just to read.